Once upon a time in Harare, Zimbabwe, lived a woman named Neria, an independent, hardworking wife and mother. She shared her life with Patrick, a loving husband and responsible man who respected her opinions and encouraged her independence, a rare gem in a time and culture where patriarchy ruled. Chapter 1 opens with a glimpse into their everyday life, filled with love, laughter, and quiet resilience. Neria and Patrick live in a modest home with their two children, trying to build a life despite economic challenges. They both work, Patrick at his office job and Neria running a small tailoring business from home. She is not just a housewife, she is a woman of purpose. Their love is built on partnership and mutual respect. Patrick supports her dreams and trusts her choices, unlike many men around them who believe women should stay in the background. This balance between tradition and modernity sets them apart. The audience quickly connects with Neria's strength, her warmth, and her quiet determination. We are introduced to their wider world, family, neighbors, and especially Patrick's traditional relatives, who hold firm to old Shona customs. His brother Phineas in particular lurks in the background, a man who disapproves of Neria's independence and believes women should be put in their place. Though he doesn't act openly yet, his disdain is clear. He sees Neria's voice in the household as a threat to tradition. Despite this tension, Chapter 1 is filled with moments of joy, laughter with the children, Patrick and Neria sharing meals, her helping neighbors with sewing, and the community admiring her as a modern woman who hasn't forgotten her roots. But beneath that joy, there's a silent warning. In Zimbabwean society at the time, a woman's rights were often only as strong as her husband's life. And that life, as we're about to see, can vanish in a moment. The chapter climaxes with a tragic twist. Patrick is involved in a sudden car accident on his way home from work. The shock hits like a thunderbolt. News of his death shatters the peaceful rhythm of Neria's life. She's devastated. The man who supported her, loved her, and stood beside her is gone, and with him, the protective shield she had built her world around. As the family prepares for the funeral, a dark cloud begins to form. Not just grief, but fear. Neria knows what may come next. In Shona custom, when a man dies, his relatives may claim ownership of his property, his children, and even control over the widow. Neria's rights, her home, her business, her children, could all be taken away unless someone speaks up. The chapter closes with a haunting silence. Neria, dressed in black, sits alone in her bedroom, holding her children close, tears streaming down her face. Outside, Phineas arrives at the house, not with condolences, but with a cold stare, the kind that says, following the burial of Patrick, the atmosphere shifts. The ceremony is over, the mourners have dispersed, and the rhythm of normal life begins to return for everyone, except Neria. For her, the world has changed irreversibly. In the stillness of her home, now filled with shadows of loss, the true consequences of her husband's death begin to. For her, the world has changed irreversibly. In the stillness of her home, now filled with shadows of loss, the true consequences of her husband's death begin to unfold. Alone with her children, Neria is forced to reckon with not just grief, but a growing fear. Without Patrick, she realizes her place within her own home is no longer secure. The home they had built together is no longer a sanctuary. In Zimbabwean custom, when a man dies, his family often asserts ownership over his belongings, including his house, possessions, and, more troublingly, his wife and children. The morning after the funeral, Patrick's relatives arrive. At the forefront is Phineas, the eldest brother, a man known for his strict adherence to traditional beliefs and for his disapproval of Neria's modern independence. His arrival is formal, but the intentions are clear. Under the guise of performing cultural duties, the family has come to lay claim to all that Patrick left behind. With solemn authority, the relatives begin listing Patrick's belongings, methodically categorizing the family home, furniture, and even the tailoring machine that Neria used for her livelihood. There is no room for discussion. In their view, all part of the ancestral inheritance. Neria's voice is subdued, her objections politely ignored. Tradition, they say, must be upheld. From that moment, Neria finds herself treated as an outsider in her own home. Phineas and other relatives begin to assume control, managing the household, speaking to the children, and occupying spaces that were once hers. The atmosphere becomes increasingly oppressive. Small actions accumulate. Her sewing machine is moved, Family photographs are taken down. Her access to money is restricted. Even the freedom to discipline or make decisions for her children is quietly stripped away. The community watches in silence. Some women look on with sympathy but remain distant, either afraid or resigned to the same fate. A few offer quiet support, bringing food or visiting when the relatives are away. But for the most part, Neria is left to navigate her grief and isolation alone. The situation escalates when Phineas delivers an ultimatum. He informs her that in order to maintain stability and retain the home, it would be best for her to remarry, not to another man, but to him. According to customary expectations, this would ensure continuity and preserve the family's legacy. To the relatives, this is a logical and even honorable proposition. For Neria, however, it is a betrayal. The very man who had belittled her, questioned her worth, and stripped her of autonomy now sought to claim her as a dependent. The proposal is not driven by compassion, but by control. And while refusing it places her at risk of losing everything, Neria begins to realize that staying silent will cost her far more. In the silence of her bedroom that evening, surrounded by the muffled sounds of a household she no longer controls, Neria makes her decision. She retrieves her sewing machine, the symbol of her independence, now relegated to a dusty corner, and places it back on the table. It is a quiet, deliberate act. Her hands tremble, but she begins to sew once more. Not just clothes, but the threads of her resolve. She is no longer just a widow. She is a woman confronting a system. She has no guarantees of success, no powerful allies, and no legal protections. But she has her mind, her dignity, and the memory of the life she and Patrick once built, a life rooted in love, not oppression. The chapter closes with Neria working into the night, her movements slow but determined. In the distance, a mournful song plays softly, its melody capturing the sorrow of her loss and the quiet strength beginning to rise in her spirit. The days following Phineas's proposal bring a stifling stillness to Neria's life. Not the calm of peace, but the heaviness of being watched. Although she has not given a formal answer to the suggestion of marriage, her silence has been taken as refusal. And with that, the mood inside the home shifts from cold formality to subtle hostility. Her position, already fragile, begins to deteriorate further. She is denied access to household money, and the little she manages to earn from her sewing is quietly questioned. The children, once joyful and free, grow quiet. They sense the tension in the air. At school, their clothes begin to show signs of wear. At home, they notice when there is no meat in the stew, or when their mother stares blankly out the window long after midnight. Phineas no longer speaks directly to Neria unless issuing instructions or reminding her of what she has lost by refusing to submit to the family's structure. The other relatives follow suit. Her meals are served separately, if at all. Her children are told not to speak during family meetings. It is clear Neria is being pushed to the margins of her own life. Worse still, the family's control is expanding. One afternoon, she returns home to find her sewing machine gone. When she asks where it is, Phineas coldly explains that it was taken for safekeeping by one of the uncles. It's not personal, he adds, but necessary to prevent confusion over ownership. In that moment, Neria realizes that everything she built, her work, her reputation, her stability, is being quietly dismantled. Faced with suffocating control and dwindling resources, Neria makes a decision that she had been dreading. She will seek outside help. But in a community bound by tradition, this is no small act. To challenge one's in-laws is to challenge the system itself. Still, she knows that silence will only lead to further loss. She begins with a visit to a local community center known for offering legal advice to women. She dresses modestly and carries only her handbag. The woman at the reception desk greets her with a knowing look. The kind of look shared by women who have seen the same story play out many times before. Inside a small consultation room, Neria tells her story in measured tones. She does not cry, she simply lists the facts: the death of her husband, the removal of her belongings, the proposal from Phineas, and the growing threat of losing her children. The legal officer listens carefully and asks a single question: was there a written will? When Neria shakes her head, the officer gently explains that without a written will, customary law tends to dominate inheritance matters, particularly if no formal marriage certificates or property documents are in place. However, she adds, Times are changing. There are cases being brought before the civil courts. Women are starting to speak up. Neria could do the same. The thought of going to court frightens her. She knows it would bring shame in the eyes of the family. She knows it would mean standing alone in public, possibly being labeled disrespectful or ungrateful. But in that moment, fear no longer outweighs what is at stake. She returns home with a small pamphlet tucked in her bag. It outlines the steps to petition for guardianship of her children and request legal protection over marital property. It is not a guarantee, but it is something she hasn't had in weeks: hope. Over the next few days, she becomes more deliberate. She begins documenting what has been taken. She writes down names, dates, and incidents. She meets quietly with a social worker recommended by the center. She learns that what has happened to her is not rare and that she is not alone. At home, however, the pressure increases. One evening, during a heated discussion, Phineas accuses her of bringing shame to the family. He implies that if she does not behave as expected, she may be sent back to her rural home alone. Neria says nothing, but her resolve grows. She understands now that her silence is not keeping peace. It is feeding the abuse. The chapter ends with Neria standing before the gate of the magistrate's court, clutching a thin folder of documents in one hand and her handbag in the other. She looks up at the worn building, its concrete walls stained by years of sun and dust. It is not grand. It does not promise salvation, but it represents a path forward. Inside those walls, her voice will finally be heard, not as a grieving widow, but as a woman standing for her rights and dignity. The courtroom is small. Enjoyed this chapter? Hit like, subscribe, and tap the On Zimovie recaps to follow the rest of Neria's powerful journey.